Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're going to conclude our study of Second Timothy and Second Peter today by talking just briefly, because we've mentioned it several times before, about the martyrdom of Paul first and then Peter, to remind ourselves what they both wanted to communicate in their last letters, and then take just a moment to look at a few verses, 3 verses really, from the book of Acts, 2 from chapter 12, 1 from chapter 16, that tell us what we need to know about these men and their mental state, their physical state, as they faced their final persecution, or excuse me, their final martyrdom, their death. So both men know when they write their last letters that this will be their last letter. Both men know that their death is imminent. Paul quite famously in Second Timothy chapter 4 says, I need you to come quickly. And he says, before he says that, he says, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I fought a good fight, I've finished the course, I've kept the faith, and I know I have the victor's crown, and it's about to be given to me. So I know that this is the end for me, he says. And Peter says in Second Peter chapter 1, the time of my departure is imminent as the Lord himself has made known to me. So he knows he's about to die. And so in the little time I have left, he says, I want to write some things down that you already know, remind you of things you already know, so that when I'm gone, you'll have them in writing and you can use them. And so both men are quite consciously writing their last letters and wanting to get their last messages across. Peter is writing to an entire area, group of churches all over Turkey, several Roman provinces, and all the congregations in them. Um, Paul is writing to one person, his son, his true son, his beloved son, Timothy. So they contrast in that way. Paul's message to Timothy is don't be ashamed. Know who you believe and stand strong. And that's his message to us too. If you stand strong and you love the Lord the way I love the Lord, you believe the Lord the way I believe the Lord, and you're looking for his coming the way I'm looking for his coming, you will wear a victor's crown too. It's not just one Stephanos being offered at the games. Everybody gets one who belongs to the Lord and stays faithful. As Jesus himself says in Revelation 2:10, be faithful to death and I'll give you a crown of life. That's what Paul was saying to Timothy. Peter says, listen, God hasn't come yet, and we may have a lot more to suffer through before he does come. We don't know when he's going to come, and when he does come, we will not be expecting it. Therefore, you need to grow. You need to work hard and grow through your knowledge of Jesus, which you have through your knowledge of the Scripture. Knowledge. He's emphasizing knowledge, knowing Jesus by knowing Scripture. Peter's the one who makes it clear in Second Peter that the apostolic witness, which is also an eyewitness account, the apostolic witness is equivalent to the prophetic witness in the Old Testament, and that everything's made sure by the eyewitness experiences that they had. Paul's writings are scripture, and he calls them scripture. So you got to know Jesus. How do we know Jesus? We know Jesus through the Word. And then when we know Jesus through the Word, we got to keep working hard and growing in grace and knowledge. That's what we got to do. So we know that they died in Rome, AD 64, AD 65, not long after the burning of Rome in the summer of AD 64, in that first wave of intense persecution of Christians by the Roman Empire, localized in the city of Rome. We know how Paul got to Rome from the book of Acts. We don't know how Peter got to Rome. We're never told, but he's there. And we mentioned how we think that Peter died second. He died last because at the end of First Peter, Paul's men, specifically Mark and Silas, are now Peter's men. And so we would assume that Paul is already dead. And then that Peter goes second. The best witness we have from history, from Eusebius and others who are closest to the time, and it's not that close to the time, but one would think that the oral tradition would have been at least accurate in these details. They were both executed at Rome. That Paul was beheaded because he's a Roman citizen. He's not allowed to be crucified. Paul was beheaded. That Peter was crucified. That's what we know. What I want us to do is to look back at two moments and just a few verses, 3 verses from the book of Acts. And we'll talk about Paul first, and we're going to turn back to Acts chapter 16. And Paul is in a Roman city as a Roman citizen, and he's in jail. And he's in Philippi. And he has been beaten to within an inch of his life, and he's been put in the stocks. And and he and Silas are there. Silas, who is working with Mark later on. Working along with Mark with Peter later on. Paul and Silas are there in Acts chapter 16 in the innermost part of the prison in Philippi. And this is what they were doing. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns of praise to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. That's everything we know about his incarceration in Rome. His dependence upon God, praising God, celebrating God, and being a witness to unbelievers. And we know that's exactly what he was still doing on the night before he was beheaded. And then we have this from Acts chapter 12. And this is about Peter in a similar circumstance. So Herod has taken, he has executed James, the brother of John. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. James on the Mount of Transfiguration. James at the raising of Jairus' daughter. James, one of the three that were always there with Jesus. Herod has taken him and killed him. And the Jews responded so favorably that he takes Peter, and he's going to have Peter killed as well. And so Peter is being guarded in Herod's prison with 4 squads of soldiers. And this is what happened. On the very night when Herod was about to bring Peter forward for execution, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains. The guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell. And he hit Peter on the side and roused him, saying, "Get up quickly." And his chains fell off his hands. And the angel said, "Gird yourself, put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." I love these verses so much. On the night before he's about to be executed, Peter, who's not in a feather bed, who's in jail, chained between 2 soldiers, is so sound asleep that when the angel appears and the light flashes in the room, it doesn't wake him up. And the angel has to rouse him to get him up and smack him on the side to get him to wake up. That's how soundly he is sleeping. It makes me think of Jesus sleeping, in the boat on the Sea of Galilee when Peter and the apostles said in the middle of the storm, "Don't you care that we're dying?" And they have to wake Jesus up because he's sleeping so soundly on the seat cushion. And there is a calmness, a preparedness that both men have because they know from the beginning this is going to be the end of their story here on this earth. And they know what waits them on the other side. And it's such a blessing to have these verses to show us what was in their heads and their hearts, and what they were and what their demeanor was at the moment when they faced their execution. Okay, we're going to look at another letter that Paul wrote from prison for a different reason, and wrote from jail, not long before he was executed. And we're going to spend several days looking at one of the shortest books in the New Testament, looking at the book of Philemon. We'll introduce our study of Philemon next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.